welcome back. This is part 2 of my bookshelf tour of my kind of all over the place fantasy collection. Part 1 was running really long, so I have broken this up into 2 parts. This is the second part. So let's get back to it, into part 2 of my rundown of my various fantasy and sword and sorcery and related fiction collection. I also have my one Andre Norton book, and I've had this forever, and I have yet to complete it all the way, but I'm going to make another stab at it one of these days, and that's Quag Keep. Has a very cool cover there, kind of sleeping, or I guess slowly waking up dragon. This one is interesting in that it's one of the earlier takes on Dungeons and Dragons role-playing gaming happening, where the gamers get thrust inadvertently into a fantasy world where things are realer than they might realize. And are they pawns in some kind of game? Do they have any direction or motivation or control of their own? And it starts off quite interesting, but like a lot of Andre Norton, it's a little slow. It's a little heavy on introducing characters and their thoughts and feelings, and not so much action that I recall, but I'm going to give it another try. It's one of my DAW books. I've had this one for a long, long time. I remember bringing this to, we had some kind of tests, the usual yearly tests that they used to give in high schools and junior highs back in the day, and I brought this to read in between breaks and taking the test. That's my chief memory of that. Something along a similar vein. I don't have the first one for some reason with me, but I do own it. I own the first 3 or 4 of this, and that's the Guardians of the Flame series by Joel Rosenberg. This is the second one, The Sword and the Chain. The first one, The Sleeping Dragon, I definitely own, and I believe I have a few others as well. This starts off quite good. It's got kind of a gritty mix along with the traditional fantasy elements, and this is taking that same kind of idea of D&D gamers, or they don't call it D&D, but playing a heroic fantasy role-playing game and then magically transported to be their characters in this disturbingly real and fairly brutal fantasy world, and how they make their way through their lives in that world. And some of them eventually have a chance to go back to their reality, and others choose to stay. Anyway, again, one of the highlights of this series is the main character, Karl, who never really gave himself a fancy name when he played. I think he was just there, just to be there playing the game. But he ends up in his kind of strongman barbarian guise, and he frees this dragon named Elegon and makes a kind of mental telepathic link with it. And Elegon is a terrific character, and he remains a chief character and motivator of the plot in these novels. Anyway, a memorable series, not to everyone's taste. I know there is quite a bit of some nasty undercurrents of the violence, and there's some violence against women, particularly, that happens in the first novel. But I believe it's motivated in the story, or it has a story. It's important or integral to the story, but it is unpleasant, and injustice is definitely served out there. But it does try to depict an unfair land and landscape, and adds a realistic tinge to the fantasy elements. Going back to a little bit before those books were coming out, I believe, I have the first 2 or 3 of this series, and that's, of course, Glen Cook's The Black Company, which is a really fresh and interesting, dark take on a mercenary troupe that's kind of serving. There's a bunch of, I guess, gods or demigods in this fantasy world, and they work for one called the Lady, this company, but eventually they have to part ways and join up for the forces of good. Very cool, very interesting series with lots of memorable characters and some memorable violence and warfare. and a pretty good depiction of the power of these gods and demigods, these beings that they have to fight and take down in some cases. Like I said, I have a few of the sequels. I don't have them here with me now, though. Flame Winds by Norvell W. Page, and there's a pretty cool cover on this sucker. You know, it's not up with the genius of Frank Frazetta or anything, but it's a pretty cool cover. And City of Sorcery. The hero of this one is Prester John, kind of wizard barbarian guy. So they're making comparisons to Conan and such. So this was one that was published in 1967, 1969 for this Berkeley Medallion edition. So again, this Flame Winds, obviously with its trying to tie into Conan and Kull, etc. Trying to kind of ride the coattails of that nostalgia boom in the late 60s and 70s that was affecting not only Edgar Rice Burroughs, but Robert E. Howard and others. This one does promise a sequel. Watch out for the next Prester John adventure, Sons of the Bear God, coming soon from Berkeley. Whether it ever did, I don't know. I don't have that one. Would like to if they did come out. And of course, good old Kane. I have, I believe, all of the Kane books. I have the novel Bloodstone back in America. I do have with me here, you know, another novel, which I believe is this one. Yes, Darkness Weaves. Again, Kane stories are just really something else, pretty special. I'm glad I had these because they used to be ubiquitous back when I was buying these, and now they're hard to find, I guess. This was from 78. This is a Warner Books. I guess these are all Warner Books. I have the collection of novelettes, Death Angel's Shadow. Death Angel's Shadow with that amazing, awesome, sweet cover. And these are all Frazetta covers. The amazing one and only Frank Frazetta. And another one, Night Winds. Hardcore sword and sorcery here. Again, Kane is not the cuddliest and warmest of lead characters. He's pretty amoral, sometimes straight up a bad guy in some ways, but usually he's the least bad of a bad bunch. And he's a very fascinating character, an immortal character. And I also have a Weird Tales, when they produced some new Weird Tales in the early 2000s, I believe, or late 1990s. They did a Karl Edward Wagner issue, and there was a new Kane story put in there, and it was Kane in London in the contemporary time, so in the 90s. So that was really interesting. And Kane also had a daughter in that one who got involved with the lead character. So one of these days I'll bring that back with me, that issue, and be able to talk about that in more detail. And of course, Sword and Sorcery collection wouldn't be complete without some Fritz Leiber, Fafford and Grey Mouser. I have a couple standalone, I have several standalone editions, not all here. I have Swords and Ice Magic, which actually is a later one. I should have showed you this one first, Swords Against Wizardry. This has one of my absolute favorite of all fantasy short stories, period, let alone Fafford and Grey Mouser stories, Stardock. Stardock is just a fantastic story. The second story in this collection here, and we got some pretty unusual cover there. It's pretty striking cover, and there's even a little interior artwork in this edition. But for completeness sake, I made sure to grab the Fantasy Masterworks trade paper editions. The first book of Lankmar, Fritz Leiber. So this collects Swords and Deviltry, Swords Against Death, Swords in the Mist, and Swords Against Wizardry, the fourth one, which this one is here. So this has the first four, and nice meaty edition that clocks in at around 760 pages or so. Okay, Not sure what I think of the cover really. Not really how I picture Fafford and Grey Mouser, but whatever. I'm just happy to have the collection. For some reason, this one's kind of a little slicker and shinier, and this second book is a little heavier and kind of got a slightly different feel to the cover, but ostensibly still the same exact editions. This is the Fantasy Masterworks, the second book of Fritz Leiber. Again, not at all how I picture Grey Mouser exactly, but you know, it gets the job done. And this has the last three collections of stories, or novelettes, or novellas: Swords of Lankmar, Swords and Ice Magic, and The Knight and Knave of Swords. And this one's not quite as long, but close, 690 pages or so. So, you know, together you got a good 1,300 plus pages of you know, good Fafford and Mouser action. So happy to have those in my collection. Speaking of fantasy works sent in a kind of mythical and magical China, we have this interesting series from Barry Hughart. The Bridge of Birds is the first one. This is the first of a trilogy of books, and they're focusing on number 10 Ox, who's like this big, I won't hesitate to use the word dumb, but you know, not a genius, but a good, loyal dude. He's number 10 Ox. He's like the number 10 son, so he's kind of sold by his family into servitude, or becomes the servant and kind of you know, I guess assistant to this Chinese sorcerer named Li Cao, Master Li Cao, and they get involved in these crazy, wild, and I do mean wild and violent and insane and highly, highly original fantasy stories. So The Bridge of Birds is the first, a novel of ancient China that never was. And like I said, I have the other two, or at least I have the second one. Maybe I just read the third one borrowed from the library. I might not have that one. I will put the other covers up here while I'm gibbering and jabbering on, talking nonsense as usual. I have a couple of others I want to show you. This one maybe belongs along talking with Wellman, but David Drake, along with Karl Edward Wagner, was a co-founder of Carcosa Press that put out the two great Wellman collections, Worst Things Waiting and Lonely Vigils. And David Drake, of course, well-known writer in his own career, focusing on anything from classic fantasy, sword and sorcery, a lot of military sci-fi, historical action adventure fiction. Got some wind out there suddenly roaring up and shaking the shutters if you hear any weird sounds back there. Anyway, he wrote this collection of, I believe, 6 stories. Old Nathan. Sorry, 5 stories. Old Nathan. Highly inspired by Manly Wade Wellman, about Old Nathan, who's an old sorcerer who's been alive a long time, and he's kind of maybe a wizard is a better term for it, and he can hear the thoughts of animals, and he lives in this rural area in, I believe, in somewhere in North Carolina or down in the South anyway, and just a really cool selection of stories. I read this book last year, and I will definitely read it again. Highly recommend it. And of course, he makes plain his intent when he gives a dedication to his late friend Manly Wade Wellman here in the front of the book. The way that these stories play out, I mean, they're great all the way through, but the way that this book closes out and what it does with the Old Nathan character is just fantastic. Just a really great ending to the story. Just perfect, letter perfect. So I recommend this book for sure if you can track it down. And then I have a lot of young adult and kids books that I'll show you at some stage in the future. But Susan Cooper, I know Deb at Omnivorous Reader is a big fan of the Dark is Rising sequence, and I have one of them, Greenwich or Greenwich. I guess this would, because it's W-I-T-C-H with the T, it's probably Greenwich. Pretty interesting folk horror magic kind of cover. And I'm not sure where this is in the sequence, which book this is in the Dark is Rising sequence. It's Oversea Under Stone, The Dark is Rising, The Grey King, Silver on the Tree. I don't know if this one is the 4th or 5th, or anyway, I have this one and I hope to get the others eventually. Pretty interesting series and a nice little edition, a small scholastic book here. Not very long, but quite, small print, but we're looking at about 131 pages, so pretty easy to read if you're into that kind of, I hesitate to use the word juvenile, young adult, because, and again, if the writer is worth their trade and writes well, then it doesn't really matter if it's a kid's book, a young adult book, or an adult book. It's just a good book. And Susan Cooper is a good writer, damn fine writer, and I don't think she talks down to her audience. So recommend that one. And T.H. White, who I do have an edition of his Once and Future King Arthurian cycle, famous book. I have that back home in the States. But what I have here is his kind of interesting kids novel, Mistress Masham's Repose. Now, this is quite an interesting one about little people riding rats, befriending a little girl and having a battle, and there's some cool art inside as well. See if I can find some of these illustrations in there. Anyway, this is a cool novel. Again, I have no problem reading children or young adult fiction. Sorry if the lights changed a little bit. Rainstorm just came in and it's taken the sun away, so it might be a little darker in here than it was before. Okay, that does it for the physical copies of what I have. I know this video has already been running long. Apologies. Thank you for sticking with me. I'll just briefly run through what else I still own. And I've checked through my records. I have records of all the books, or pretty much all of the books that I own that are not here with me. And I'll just talk a bit about what some of those are. So Tim at Secret Fire Books, Jim at News from the Gelding, and Chris at Liminal Spaces. I've all embarked on a reading project to read all of the at least main 6 novels in Michael Moorcock's Elric saga. And I have book club editions of all the main Elric books. I don't believe I have the kind of standalone volume, but I have, whose title I forget right now, but I have those in 2 book club editions, with one that has the first 3 novels in it and the other has the other 3 novels, the last 3 novels. Again, those are both back home in the States. Next time I go back, I'll be definitely bringing them back with me to dig into those. I also have the Chronicle of, in a similar book club double volume edition set, I have the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny, which collects those 6 novels, 3 in each of the volumes. I have the first 3 Shannara books. I have The Sword of Shannara, which again, that was a key read for me when I was a teenager, when it first came out. Whether it's, holds up these days or looks more like a pastiche novel or a knockoff of Lord of the Rings, I couldn't tell you. I haven't read it since then, but I did read that full book. I also bought trade paperback versions of its sequels, which I believe are the Elfstones of Shannara and the Wish Song of Shannara. Never got into the TV series version, which didn't seem to quite capture the books very well, but I also have Magic Kingdom for Sale Sold, at least the first 1 or 2 of Terry Brooks' other series that he started there, which is kind of fun. I have Ursharak, which was, again, I guess Lord of the Rings knockoff, but pretty cool because it was written by the great artists, the brothers Hildebrandt. They wrote it with, I think, another third person's help. Kind of very by the numbers fantasy story, but people just covered from cover to cover, filled with great illustrations and art by those brothers, very talented guys. I have the complete Chronicles of Narnia in paperback form, in the one that came out with the little box, the box set, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and the rest, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, what else? Horse and His Boy, Magician's Nephew, The Last Battle. I'm probably missing one in there. Those are great. So, and I have those back home. I need to bring back in the States in storage. I hope they're still in decent shape. I have them all in nice kind of Rubbermaid totes stored in above the garage at my family's home. Last I checked, they were looking pretty good. That was a year or so ago. I also have, speaking of another great, I guess, young adult fantasy series, but I think they're good for adults. Again, Tim at Secret Fire Books has championed this series, and that's the Prydain Chronicles by Lloyd Alexander. Fantastic series, really well done, beautifully written, and engaging with a real coming-of-age arc for its main character, Taran. Taran the Pig Keeper, who becomes Taran the Wanderer, and eventually Taran the High King. Very great, building off of the Mabinogion and the Welsh mythos there. Let's see, what else? I have Mythical Wood by Robert Holdstock, which is a really, it's borderline horror, but really fascinating fantasy novel. That's a very interesting one. Another high fantasy series, again, trying, maybe knocking off or inspired by, heavily inspired by, but very interesting in its own way. Inspired by Tolkien, and that's The Circle of Light, 4-book cycle there, which has a dwarf, a bear, and an otter as its main characters, as well as several other human characters. And also, and that's Neil Hancock wrote those, the author Neil Hancock, and those books were everywhere in the 80s, and maybe you can still pretty easily find them now, I'm not sure. He also wrote a kind of one-off called Dragon Winter, which is pretty cool too. What else? I have the first Ursula K. Le Guin Ursi book, A Wizard of Ursi. I have The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, famous, older keystone kind of early fantasy work. I have The Dragon and the George, the very first in that series by sci-fi writer Gordon R. Dixon. It's a very entertaining fantasy where a modern day human, at least at that time modern day, from the 80s I believe, is thrust back into kind of medieval fantasy world and befriends a dragon. That's a very fun book. I have Bard, which apparently some people have talked about is hard to find these days. Bard by Keith John Taylor. I believe that's his name, Keith John Taylor. Yeah. I've mentioned before I have The Once and Future King from T.H. White. Classic. The Riddle Master of Head by Patricia McKillop, which I believe was the start of another series. Mustafa and His Wise Dog by Esther M. Friesner. Kind of Middle Eastern or kind of a takeoff on some maybe Arabian Nights type of storytelling. And then I have a couple of other Lynn Carter books, but he only edited them, and this is where Carter's strengths really lie, or lied, laid, whatever. Carter was probably the most respected as an editor, and he was editing Ballantyne's adult fantasy line for a while there. And, he wrote a book about Tolkien, and he wrote a book, Imaginary Worlds, about all sorts of these classic fantasy writers. And he wrote, he edited 2 volumes of great short novels of adult fantasy. I don't have volume 2, but I do have volume 1. And he also edited the Year's Best Fantasy Stories line for Daw Books for a while. And I have one of those. It's, I think it's Year's Best Fantasy 1972, but it was published in 1975, and it actually covers 2 years, 73 and 74. So there's some fun stories in there as well. Wow, the rain's really coming down. It's one of those summer storms that we often get off and on here during July and August in Japan. Anyway, thank you if you've stuck around this far. I'm very happy if you found something of interest here. Big holes, of course, in my collection. There's a whole bunch of fantasy stuff that I don't have that I probably should. I don't have any Dresden Files, Jim Butcher books. I think I had some in the past and got rid of them eventually. I probably should have kept those. And some other stuff I have on my Kindle that I just won't go into for time purposes or lack of time purposes. And like I mentioned, Robert E. Howard, got a bunch. Manuel Wellman, who definitely fits in the fantasy, dark fantasy, folk fantasy field. I'm not going to talk about him in this video, but I will talk about them later. So thanks for watching. If you have anything you'd like to comment on about any of the books I showed you here or talked about, or others that you'd like to recommend, please do so. Thanks a bunch, and I will see you next time.